After great progress in talks with Russia, there's still no ceasefire with Ukraine. But U.S. President Trump is now set to meet President Putin in person, with plans to punish India and threaten China for buying Russian oil firmly on the table. So will Trump's tariffs and sanctions prove the leverage needed to end the war in Ukraine? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. In the coming days, Presidents Trump and Putin will meet face-to-face to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. It was something Trump promised months ago, but obviously securing a ceasefire didn't get done on day one. So right now, the U.S. is seeking to maximize pressure on Russia and its trade partners by piling up punitive tariffs for doing business with Moscow. But will that prove the key to ending this years-long war? Here's a look.
Hundreds of thousands dead, ruined cities, the now 3.5-year war in Ukraine still with no clear end in sight. On Wednesday, President Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff held a 3-hour meeting with President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. The talks came ahead of a Friday deadline of further US sanctions on Russia. As Witkoff returned to Washington, the US president outlined the result.
We had some very good talks with President Putin today, and there's a very good chance that we could be ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
The Kremlin has confirmed the meeting will take place in the coming days and says the venue has been agreed upon. It will be the first face-to-face meeting between a sitting US and Russian president since Russia launched its full-scale assault on Ukraine in 2022. Ukraine's President Zelensky, meanwhile, said he had spoken to Trump after the Witkoff meeting with European leaders on the same call.
It appears that Russia is now more inclined to consider a ceasefire. The pressure on them is working. But the main thing is to make sure they don't deceive anyone in the details, neither US nor the United States.
And that pressure on Moscow is increasing. As he hailed the progress, President Trump signed an executive order imposing an additional 25% tariff on India for buying Russian oil. He also threatened to do the same to China. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he made a bold promise to end the war between Russia and Ukraine in just one day.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly.
But things haven't gone as planned. In the face of Western sanctions, Russia switched its oil and gas exports to India and China, and its economy is now fully on a war footing. 3 rounds of meetings in Istanbul have led only to prisoner exchanges. And since President Trump's recent deadline for further sanctions, Russia has actually ramped up its missile attacks, especially on Ukraine's capital. Last week's strikes on Kiev killed 32 people, one of the deadliest attacks since the war began. This week, the US administration approved a further $200 million worth of additional military sales to Ukraine. This after similar pledges by a number of European countries. President Putin says he wants peace, but only on his terms. There are suggestions that he may be willing to reduce or stop long-range missile strikes on Ukraine, but he's unlikely to bow to demands for a full ceasefire because he believes Russia is finally winning the war.
So, will a face-to-face Trump-Putin meeting actually secure a ceasefire and change the reality in Ukraine? Well, joining me now to debate that and much more are from Podillia in southwest Ukraine, head of the International Outreach Department at the Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Tetyana Ogarkova. From London, visiting senior research fellow at King's College London, Anna Matveeva. And from Washington, a former U.S. diplomat who served in Moscow, Donald Jensen. Thanks all so much for being with me. Donald, first, I'll start with you because I'd like to get an American opinion on Witkoff's visit. Was it progress? And do you think he really is the best diplomat to be dealing with the Kremlin right now?
Well, I can't give you the American view. I can give you my view, which is that I found it very noteworthy that the Kremlin's comment on the discussions yesterday were much milder than the U.S. Take on it, which was much more optimistic. I think the president referred to great progress. And of course, we don't know that in advance without seeing what the progress was. So I think I'm going to reserve judgment on that. As for Envoy Witkoff, I found it very interesting last week that President Trump said that the Russians asked for Mr. Witkoff, perhaps because they know him well, perhaps because they feel he knows the issues well. But as you probably are aware, a lot of people in Washington think on something this sensitive, perhaps someone else could have been chosen with more experience, certainly in dealing with the Russians. But I can't comment one way or the other about his qualifications, except to say I found it interesting that he was brought back after a lot of work over the past 2 or 3 months in the Middle East. So the key issue is what next, and the key issue is what exactly did they agree upon yesterday, if anything at all. And again, both sides seem to have a little different take on what happened.
Okay, still though, Anna, let me get your opinion then on whatever groundwork may have been laid via this ambassador being sent. Do you think Witkoff is good as a mediator of sorts, as the envoy from the U.S. for this level of negotiation?
I think he's good, and I think he's the right person for the moment, because there are so many experienced diplomats, negotiators who have absolutely no rapport with Russians. There are very few people in the American team, and certainly almost nobody in the European top team who are welcome in Moscow, who can speak to Russians, who are acceptable to them. So sending them somebody whom they would kind of be very suspicious from the start is not a good idea if you want to make progress. The other thing, which is, I think, quite important, and that's where we get back to Obama's time. Obama also wanted, when he just came to power, to reset relations with Russia. What he has done, he sent there Michael McFaul, who is a renowned Russia specialist. He certainly spoke Russian, new people, new culture, new politics, but he also came with his own agenda on how Russia should shape, how it should reform. So, and that personal agenda was standing in the way of the Russian-American relations. So having somebody with roughly clean record on this thing but somebody who has strong nerves and who has stamina to do it, I think it's a good move. So far we are getting somewhere where we have not been like a year ago.
Let me ask Tetyana then, does Ukraine feel as good about the U.S. diplomatic staff as Russia does at this point?
Well, we are very suspicious about Mr. Witkoff because his previous talks with Kremlin, with Putin, gave strictly nothing to Ukraine and to the ceasefire history. So now we are observing this situation about these negotiations, and we are very much skeptical about the possibility to end this war, even to obtain a ceasefire on acceptable conditions for Ukraine, because what was discussed yesterday between Witkoff and Putin, it was Russian agenda and Russian opinion on this war, and for sure Ukrainian perspective was not present. And we don't know exactly as for now what they agreed on. These talks were qualified like constructive talks, but let's see on the ground what is really happening now. Yesterday, today, during the night and in the morning, there are severe shellings on the front line, and not only on the front line, but also in the cities far away from the front line. So Russia is continuing its war, and what Witkoff is doing right now is comforting, and this comforting Putin and Kremlin in the attempt to continue the war, all on pretending to negotiate. But let's be serious. To negotiate, you need to put an extreme pressure on Russia and put them in the situation when they will be really ready to negotiate. And Trump, for the moment, Witkoff, they haven't reached that point.
Okay, yeah, Donald, it is very hard to make heads or tails of where the U.S. really stands, because the positioning can change from day to day. So Russia seems to think Witkoff is the right man for the job. Ukraine is obviously quite suspicious. Where do you see the U.S. administration kind of going? What will get them what they want so that negotiations can continue in the fairest manner possible, if I can say that? I mean, what would be the minimum give from Moscow to force the U.S. hand here?
Well, first of all, on Witkoff, it's important that the president have confidence in him, and the Russians will talk to him. But as a previous guest said, we just don't know what happened yesterday on the table. Trump, to some extent, is at a diplomatic turning point. He's talked about increasing the tariffs on India and China. That comes with some political costs. He can unleash Ukraine, let's say, with more energetic military activities against Russia. There are a lot of things on the table, but at the moment, he seems to be favoring the tariff approach. The scenarios of, particularly with India, and relations have not been good the past few days. So that seems to be the way the president is away from, for now at least, some of the harsher. That's important to keep in mind. But he may well have bought, if we could say bought, some time to talk to the Russians further, but you need the Ukrainian point of view. And without that, and I think Trump wants to include that, there's not going to be much progress at all. If I could add one more point, I think we have to understand that the Russians use negotiations in a different way than the West does. For the Russians, it's an instrument advancing their interests. The West sees it as a compromise, as both sides are winning and so forth. And again, it's very, very difficult from our point of view to get behind the minds of Lavrov and Putin and Dmitry.
It's interesting you say that, though, because so many see Trump's positioning here instead as the zero-sum game. It's not win-win. It's either we win or...
Win-win.
Right.
It's not win-win. And you see the Trump approach, which in many ways has a lot of merit. Get the positions, reconcile the positions, get both sides to agree. And my own view is that that's not going to work, but it's worth trying, because the Russians have shown no sign of ending the war, no sign of bombing the civilian targets in Ukraine. And they say that every day, including earlier this week. So we have to be very careful and have realistic measures of progress. Maybe that's a meeting between Trump and Putin, but Zelensky has to be included. The Ukrainians have to be included. And for any serious diplomatic progress toward ending the war, Vladimir Putin has to make very, very tough decisions, which will partly cost his support at home for the war, could destabilize the economy and so forth, all the things we've talked about the past few days.
Okay, Anna, go ahead.
Well, I don't think that the US has some kind of magic bullet, which it hasn't used so far, to press Russia into some kind of ending the war, whatever kind of tomorrow. I think that if that magic bullet did exist, Biden probably would have already pressed it. So it is very difficult to hurt Russian economy without hurting American economy. Trump signaled very early on, that was part of his electoral promise, that he doesn't want American taxpayers to subsidize forever wars, and also that he is not going to do whatever to help Ukraine to continue fighting indefinitely. So that's there are limitations about all the secondary sanctions. Trump a week ago said himself that he's not quite sure whether it would work, because Russians are pretty good at evading these sanctions. They have good macroeconomic stability. They have ability to take some pain, but it is not something which is going to ruin the economy. So in that sense, I think the approach which he's taking is the only sensible approach. Trying to negotiate from the Russian point of view, they already had Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, 2014-15, when they stopped the advance, which in their view was going successful, in order to give a negotiation settlement a chance. That didn't work, so they are not going to repeat that scenario, which from their point of view was a disaster.
Okay.
So, they will press on.
Anna, I mean, is that to say that there's absolutely nothing forcing Putin's hand here to concede anything to the U.S. on Ukraine?
I would put it on the kind of on its head. I think that there are positive incentives, which Trump and his team, and potentially, European leaders, which, well, it seems to be very unlikely at the moment, but kind of, God knows, they can start offering Russia positive incentives, the roadmap to a gradual lifting of sanctions, the benefits of Russian-American cooperation in economy and technology, international affairs are enormous.
Okay.
So Putin understands that. So yes, that would be something which Russians would be more responsive rather than secondary sanctions.
Okay. Tetyana, in the meantime, President Zelensky is saying, don't let Russia deceive anyone, I'm quoting him, in the details in these negotiations. What does that mean? What details is he talking about? And how could Russia be able to pull the wool over everyone's eyes and deceive anyone in these negotiations?
Well, the Ukrainian position on what is going on is quite clear for many months already. Ukraine has agreed to a total ceasefire if Russia did the same many months ago. So now what we observe another round of the same attempt to create the possibility for real negotiations. And you have to pay attention what Ukrainian society is ready for, not only for what Zelensky says, because a good question to ask in all this Trump approach to the end of this war is if anybody won a war in the past by economic measures, by putting sanctions or tariffs. If the question is serious one, how to bring the just peace to this geographical part of the planet, you should ask yourself, how do you end this war? Do you think realistically that on putting sanctions and tariffs, you would force Putin to stop his war? Or otherwise, you think about other options. Ukraine has many possibilities in the past to make significant progress in defending itself. Like, for example, in 2022, after a brilliant Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kherson Oblast and in Kharkiv region, Ukraine was asking for weapons, and we received weapons, but we didn't receive enough weapons to progress in our counteroffensive. So nowadays we are talking in terms of ending the war, as if any war on this planet could end by itself, with specifically having such a regime as Putin's regime, which can only survive by producing war. Because if Putin stops the war, can you imagine what would happen in Russia between these millions of people who lost their lives and who didn't achieve their objective? Because none of strategic objectives of Russia are not achieved. So Putin cannot stop this war, because otherwise the regime will fall.
Okay,
so
but
we have to.
But some might say you're underestimating the support for this war within Russia. Just quickly, Anna, I mean, is that true? If the war were to stop, Tetyana seems to think that the Russian people would revolt, and that might not be the case.
Well, there was an expectation in Ukraine, and especially in the West, at the beginning of the war, that Russian regime is brittle, that it's about to fall, that kind of a slight push, like Wagner revolt, Yevgeny Prigozhin is going to just bring a crisis in Russia. None of that happened. The government is pretty much charge. Putin enjoys a higher level of approval than before the war. So it doesn't there is a more of a sense of consolidation rather than dismay. So in that sense, I don't think that they will. That they're so much depending on the domestic opinion. It is, I think, public is solidly behind them at the moment.
Okay, let me come back to Donald, though. And Donald, as for the major stick in these negotiations, could Russia's allies and trade partners actually, given what Trump's threats are and the threat of sanctions and further tariffs, could it work against the United States? Could threatening China again and India backfire?
And well, it certainly could. I think we saw the press Thursday this morning, which there seems to be a plan to have the Indian president visit Beijing at the end of August. It could well drive those two together, even despite the high tariffs, which I don't expect India to be, of course, all happy with. But if I could add one more point, which differentiates this week from February, which is to say that political opinion in the United States, especially in the U.S. Congress, has tilted very strongly toward the Ukrainians in the past several weeks, as Zelensky and Trump have repaired their damaged relationship. And you see the president himself has signed approved additional military assistance to Ukraine. The Republican Congress, has parts of the Congress, have joined the general congressional majority in favor of supporting Ukraine. And that's quite a bit different than in February. So the context is moving, even as the players at the table have changed so much. And that really is, I think, going to drive the relationship, the talks, the crisis, our reaction to the crisis in the next several weeks as we see what comes next.
Okay. Anna, I see you disagree, but Tetyana agrees. Tetyana, why? Do you think that's correct?
Yes, yes, for sure. There are some progress, and there was some additional military aid to Ukraine during last weeks, and it is extremely important because it's showing all the pressure on Russia. Because, as I said, so you cannot press Russia to start real negotiations. I mean, not these fake negotiations when they talk just to betray you, or when they talk just to play for time, and when they talk and they continue to bombard civilians and military all over Ukraine. So to make a situation really painful for Russia, you have to show strength. You have to send weapons. You have to show the military capacity for deep strikes inside Russia territory, and to show the real cost for Russian economy and for Russian resources and human potential, just to show them the price of the war. Because when Donald Trump is talking about, Victor was talking about that Russians paid a lot of a big price for what they already did. It's like you talk about a criminal who committed many crimes, because this war against Ukraine is a pure crime, because it's illegal, because it has no legal foundation, no historical foundation. And then you say, but criminal, he paid a big price for that, so let him have what he wants to have. When they talk about territories and what they have when they talk about neutral status of Ukraine or any kind of other issues. So this is not the issue here. You have to show strength to Putin, and then he will be ready for negotiations.
Anna, I know you think the answer here is not a military solution, but then let me ask you, final question, what is the end game for Russia here? Will we end up seeing what's been the case with Georgia, you think, whereby Russia will simply take or occupy territory and the rest of the world eventually accepts it?
There are three possible outcomes. First, that Trump succeeds, and there will be some kind of real peace deal, and both Russia and Ukraine agree to it. I do not see Zelensky and his leadership doing it at the moment, but this is a serious option still. The other option is a continuation of Ukrainian policy of peace through strength, which in reality is quite likely mean that Ukraine would lose more territory. And the third line is that there will be gradual scaling down of hostilities because of the exhaustion of resources in the West and Ukraine in general.
Donald, quickly, any of those options you find most realistic?
Well, I think several are very interesting, but I do think the war will continue on for the foreseeable future. And I think that a frozen conflict or perhaps even a scaled down in place de facto situation, and more or less as we have now, will continue. I don't think the Ukrainians, frankly, will ever give up. And I think that suggests a long fight between the two sides. But on the issue of Putin standing at home, I want to focus. I would focus less on public opinion than in that kruzhok, that circle of people around Putin in the Kremlin, most of whom say they want support the war, but clearly there are signs of discontent, particularly among some oligarchs, some parts of the security services, and also some parts of the military. The Prigozhin episode is remarkable for many ways, one of which is that no one really rallied to protect Putin. It took 2 or 3 days. And this suggests that I wouldn't use the phrase fragile or brittle. I would say that Putin himself is constrained in what he can do. And that
Okay.
suggests he has to go forward and wants to go forward with the war for now.
Okay, that will have to be the final word. Donald, I know you very much disagree, Anna, but I'm sure we'll be talking again as soon as that one-on-one meeting does happen. So I'd like to thank you. In the meantime, all three of my panelists so much for being with me, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We will see you next time.